King Alexander sat in the oak-paneled study of Blackstone Palace, his weathered hands gripping the armrests of his leather chair as rain pelted the tall windows behind him. The 72-year-old monarch had ruled the kingdom of Valdoria for nearly 3 decades, but tonight felt different from any other evening in his long reign. The weight of the crown seemed heavier than usual, pressing down on his silver hair as he contemplated the decision that would change everything. The door creaked open, and his private secretary, Lord Pemberton, entered with measured steps. The elderly man had served 3 generations of the royal family, his loyalty unwavering through countless scandals and crises. Tonight, however, even his usually composed demeanor showed cracks of concern. "Your Majesty," Pemberton said softly, placing a sealed envelope on the mahogany desk. "The documents you requested have been prepared. The legal team has reviewed everything twice, and they confirm that the provisions within the Royal Marriage Act of 1847 do indeed grant you the authority to proceed." Alexander's blue eyes, still sharp despite his age, fixed on the envelope. Inside lay the legal framework that would strip his second wife, Queen Isabella, of her royal title and position. The decision had not come lightly, but recent events had forced his hand in ways he never imagined possible. Isabella had entered his life 5 years after the death of his beloved first wife, Queen Catherine. Where Catherine had been born into nobility and understood the delicate balance of royal duty, Isabella came from a wealthy but non-aristocratic background. She was a successful businesswoman, charming and intelligent, but she had never fully grasped the invisible rules that governed palace life. The first signs of trouble had emerged gradually. Isabella's tendency to speak her mind in public, her friendship with controversial figures, and her frequent absences from state functions had raised eyebrows among the royal household staff. The palace press office worked overtime to manage the constant stream of unflattering headlines that seemed to follow in her wake. But it was the recent discovery that had shattered Alexander's trust completely. 3 days earlier, his head of security, Sir Marcus Thornfield, had presented him with evidence that Isabella had been secretly meeting with foreign diplomats without the knowledge or approval of the Foreign Office. The meetings, captured by palace security cameras, showed her accepting what appeared to be substantial payments in exchange for information about upcoming state visits and policy decisions. The revelation had hit Alexander like a physical blow. He had married Isabella believing her to be ambitious but ultimately loyal to the crown. The idea that she might be selling state secrets for personal gain was almost incomprehensible. Yet the evidence was undeniable, carefully documented and verified by multiple sources within the intelligence community. Prince William, Alexander's son and heir to the throne, had been the first family member to learn of the situation. At 35, William possessed his father's sense of duty but with a modern understanding of media and public relations. When Alexander had called him to the palace for an emergency meeting, William's reaction had been swift and decisive. "Father, this cannot continue," William had said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Every day she remains as queen is another day our family's reputation suffers. The people of Valdoria deserve better than this uncertainty." Princess Elena, Alexander's daughter and William's younger sister, had been equally supportive of decisive action, though her approach was more diplomatic. At 32, she had spent years working with various charitable organizations and understood the importance of public perception in maintaining the monarchy's relevance. "The institution must be protected," Elena had argued during their family conference. "Isabella's actions have already caused significant damage to our standing with Parliament and our international allies. If we don't act now, the consequences could be irreversible." Even Queen Mother Margaret, Alexander's 90-year-old mother, had weighed in with her characteristically blunt assessment. Despite her advanced age, her mind remained sharp, and her decades of experience navigating royal crises made her counsel invaluable. "In my day, we faced the abdication crisis with Edward VIII, she had reminded them, her voice still carrying the authority that had guided the family through numerous challenges. "Sometimes difficult decisions must be made for the greater good of the crown. Personal feelings cannot supersede duty to the realm." The family meeting had been painful but necessary. Alexander had listened to each perspective, weighing the emotional cost against the practical necessities of leadership. Isabella had not been present for these discussions, as the family had agreed that the initial conversations needed to occur without her influence. As Alexander now sat alone in his study, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. His first marriage to Catherine had been arranged but had blossomed into genuine love and partnership. Together, they had modernized the monarchy while maintaining its essential traditions. Catherine's death from cancer 7 years earlier had left him devastated and uncertain about the future. Isabella had appeared during his darkest period, bringing energy and vitality back into his life. She was 15 years younger, with auburn hair and green eyes that sparkled when she laughed. Her business acumen impressed him, and her outsider's perspective on royal protocols had initially seemed refreshing rather than problematic. Their courtship had been relatively brief by royal standards. The public had initially embraced Isabella, seeing her as a breath of fresh air in the sometimes stuffy world of palace protocol. The wedding had been a scaled-down affair compared to William's future coronation, but it had still captured international attention and generated positive publicity for the monarchy. The early years of their marriage had been challenging but manageable. Isabella struggled with the constant scrutiny and the restrictions placed on her personal freedom. She chafed at having her schedule managed by palace staff and frequently complained about the elaborate protocols surrounding even simple activities like shopping or dining out. Alexander had tried to be patient and understanding, remembering his own difficulties adjusting to royal life when he was younger. He arranged for additional training and support, hoping that time and experience would help Isabella find her footing. The palace staff worked diligently to accommodate her preferences while maintaining necessary security and protocol requirements. However, Isabella's resistance to guidance had gradually escalated into open defiance of established procedures. She began making public statements without clearing them through the appropriate channels, expressing personal opinions on political matters that placed the monarchy in uncomfortable positions. Her social media presence, while initially seen as modernizing, became a source of constant controversy, as she shared increasingly provocative content. The breaking point had come with the intelligence report about her secret meetings. Sir Marcus Thornfield had approached Alexander with obvious reluctance, knowing that the information would cause immense personal pain. The security chief had been monitoring unusual communications patterns when he discovered Isabella's encrypted messages with foreign contacts. "Your Majesty, I wish I didn't have to present this information," Thornfield had said during their private meeting. "But the evidence suggests that Queen Isabella has been providing sensitive information about state matters to representatives of the Northland Republic. The payments appear to total nearly £2 million over the past 18 months. The betrayal cut deeper than any political crisis Alexander had faced during his reign. He had trusted Isabella with state secrets, included her in confidential briefings, and shared his concerns about various policy matters. To discover that she had been monetizing this access felt like a violation of everything he held sacred about marriage and duty. The legal implications were staggering. Treason charges could potentially be filed. Though Alexander hoped to avoid such extreme measures, the political ramifications were equally serious, as Parliament would undoubtedly demand explanations and assurances about the security of state information. Prime Minister Richardson had already been briefed on the situation and had expressed grave concerns about the monarchy's credibility. The intelligence services were conducting a comprehensive review to determine what information might have been compromised and what damage control measures would be necessary. "Your Majesty," Richardson had said during their emergency meeting, "I must stress the urgency of this situation. Our intelligence partnerships with allied nations could be severely impacted if there's any perception that palace security has been compromised. Swift and decisive action is essential to maintain confidence in our institutions." As Alexander contemplated the sealed envelope on his desk, he thought about Isabella's likely reaction to the news. She was currently attending a charity gala in the capital city, unaware that her world was about to change dramatically. He had instructed his security detail to ensure she returned to the palace immediately after the event, claiming he needed to discuss urgent family matters with her. The conversation would be one of the most difficult of his life. Despite everything that had happened, he still felt remnants of the affection that had drawn him to Isabella years earlier. But his duty as king superseded his personal feelings, and the evidence of her betrayal left him no choice but to act. Lord Pemberton cleared his throat softly, drawing Alexander's attention back to the present moment. "Your Majesty, shall I arrange for the family meeting tomorrow morning as planned?" Alexander nodded slowly, his decision crystallizing with each passing moment. "Yes, Pemberton. Have William, Elena, and Queen Mother Margaret here at 9 o'clock sharp, and ensure that Queen Isabella is present as well." It's time she learned about our discoveries and the consequences that must follow. The rain continued to beat against the windows as Alexander finally reached for the envelope, breaking the wax seal with steady hands. Inside, the legal documents outlined the precise mechanisms by which Isabella's royal title could be revoked, her privileges withdrawn, and her position within the succession eliminated. The process would be swift but thorough, designed to minimize constitutional complications while ensuring the monarchy's stability. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new chapter in the history of the Valdorian crown, one written in disappointment and betrayal, but necessary for the survival of the institution Alexander had dedicated his life to preserving. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Persian rugs of the blue drawing room as the royal family gathered for what would become known in palace circles as the most consequential family meeting in decades. Queen Isabella entered the ornate chamber at precisely 9 o'clock, her emerald silk dress perfectly coordinated with her jewelry.
Unaware that her carefully maintained royal facade was about to crumble.
Alexander studied his wife's face as she settled into the Louis XVI chair across from him, searching for any sign that she suspected the gravity of the situation. Isabella appeared relaxed, even cheerful, having spent the previous evening at a successful charity fundraiser where she had been praised for her eloquent speech about children's education initiatives. Prince William stood near the fireplace, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. His jaw was set in a hard line, and his hands were clasped behind his back in a posture that Isabella had learned to associate with serious discussions. Princess Elena sat beside Queen Mother Margaret on the blue velvet sofa, both women maintaining the composed expressions that years of royal training had perfected. "Isabella," Alexander began, his voice carrying the formal tone he typically reserved for state occasions. "We need to discuss some very serious matters that have come to our attention. I want you to listen carefully before responding, because the implications of this conversation will affect not only you, but the entire royal family and the monarchy itself." Isabella's green eyes flickered with the first hint of concern, though she maintained her poise. "Of course, Alexander. Is this about the upcoming state visit from the Danish royal family? I know there have been some protocol questions about the seating arrangements for the state dinner." The innocuous nature of her response struck Alexander as almost surreal given what he was about to reveal. Here was a woman who had been secretly betraying state confidences for financial gain, yet she could still discuss dinner party arrangements as if nothing had changed. Sir Marcus Thornfield entered the room carrying a leather portfolio, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere from family discussion to official investigation. Isabella's eyes followed him with growing unease as he positioned himself near the door, effectively blocking her exit route. "Isabella," Alexander continued, "3 days ago, our security services presented me with evidence of activities that constitute a fundamental breach of your duties as queen and as my wife. I'm going to share this information with you now, and I want you to understand that denying these facts will only make the situation worse." He gestured to Sir Marcus, who opened his portfolio and removed a series of photographs and documents. The first image showed Isabella entering a small cafe in the merchant quarter of the capital city, her face partially concealed by a wide-brimmed hat and dark glasses. "This photograph was taken 6 weeks ago," Sir Marcus explained in his measured professional tone. "Our surveillance team had been monitoring unusual communication patterns emanating from the palace when they identified this meeting between Your Majesty and Mr. Viktor Petrov, a known intelligence operative working for the Northland Republic." Isabella's face went pale as she stared at the photograph, her carefully applied makeup suddenly appearing stark against her whitening complexion. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the image, studying it as if hoping it might transform into something less damaging. "This is completely out of context," she said, her voice higher than usual. "Mr. Petrov approached me about potential cultural exchange programs between our countries. I thought I was being diplomatic by agreeing to meet with him." Prince William stepped forward, his expression stern and unforgiving. "Mother, please don't insult our intelligence. Cultural exchange programs are arranged through the Foreign Office, not through secret meetings in back-alley cafes, and they certainly don't involve exchanging briefcases full of cash." Sir Marcus produced another photograph showing Isabella accepting what appeared to be a thick envelope from the man identified as Petrov. Her face was clearly visible in this image, and there was no mistaking the transaction taking place. The envelope contained £50,000 in untraceable currency, Sir Marcus continued. This was the third such payment we were able to document, though our investigation suggests the relationship may have extended back nearly 2 years. Queen Mother Margaret spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed numerous royal crises over her 9 decades. Isabella, in all my years associated with this family, I have never seen such a blatant betrayal of the trust placed in you. The very foundation of our constitutional monarchy depends on the absolute discretion and loyalty of its members. Isabella's composure finally began to crack as the full scope of the evidence became apparent. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "The constant scrutiny, the impossible expectations, the way everyone watches every word I say and every move I make. I never asked for this life, and I've done my best to fulfill duties that were never clearly explained to me." Princess Elena leaned forward, her expression mixing disappointment with genuine concern. "Isabella, we all understand the challenges of royal life. I've struggled with them myself, as has every member of this family. But selling state secrets is not a reasonable response to those pressures. You've potentially compromised national security and damaged relationships with our allies." The room fell silent as Isabella processed the accusations against her. Alexander watched as various emotions played across her face: denial, anger, fear, and finally a kind of resigned defeat. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "The money wasn't for personal luxury," she said, staring at her hands folded in her lap. "My brother's construction company was facing bankruptcy. His employees, over 200 families, would have lost everything. I couldn't let that happen when I had access to information that people were willing to pay for." Alexander felt his heart sink even further. While Isabella's motivations might have been understandable on a human level, they made no difference to the legal and constitutional implications of her actions. If anything, her admission of guilt made the situation more straightforward, if no less painful. "What specific information did you provide to these contacts?" Sir Marcus asked, his tone remaining professional despite the gravity of the admission. Isabella looked up at Alexander with tears beginning to form in her eyes. Details about upcoming trade negotiations, information about which ministers would be attending certain meetings, some preliminary discussions about defense spending. I thought it was all relatively harmless administrative information. Prince William made a sound of frustration and disbelief. "Relatively harmless? Isabella, that information could affect currency markets, influence international negotiations, and provide strategic advantages to foreign governments. The damage you may have caused could take years to fully understand." The weight of her actions seemed to finally register as Isabella began to cry in earnest. "I never meant for it to go this far," she sobbed. "Mr. Petrov said he was just interested in maintaining friendly relations between our countries. He made it seem like I was contributing to diplomatic understanding." Alexander stood and walked to the window, his back to the room as he struggled with his own emotions. The woman he had married, the person he had shared his deepest concerns and confidences with, had been systematically betraying him for financial gain. The personal hurt was almost overwhelming, but his duty as king demanded that he focus on the institutional implications. "Isabella," he said without turning around, "the legal team has informed me that under the Royal Marriage Act of 1847, I have the constitutional authority to revoke your title and position as queen. Given the evidence of your activities and your admission of guilt, I have no choice but to exercise that authority." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella's crying stopped abruptly as the full implications of Alexander's words sank in. Queen Mother Margaret sat perfectly still, her lifetime of experience with royal protocol evident in her unwavering composure. Prince William and Princess Elena exchanged glances, both understanding that they were witnessing a historic moment that would reshape their family forever. "What does that mean exactly?" Isabella asked, her voice small and uncertain. Lord Pemberton, who had been standing quietly near the door, stepped forward with a folder of documents. "Your Majesty, it means that effective immediately you will no longer hold the title of Queen. Your name will be removed from the line of succession, your state privileges will be revoked, and your access to classified information will be terminated." Isabella stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. "And what about our marriage? What about my life here at the palace?" Alexander finally turned back to face her, his expression mixing sorrow with resolve. "Our marriage will continue, but you will hold no official royal position. You'll be provided with a residence and financial support appropriate for the wife of the king, but you will have no role in state functions or access to government information. The practical implications began to cascade through Isabella's mind. No more state dinners, no more official travels, no more of the pomp and ceremony that had initially attracted her to royal life. But more importantly, no more of the respect and deference that came with being Queen of Valdoria. "The announcement will be made this afternoon," Prince William added. "The palace press office is preparing a statement that will emphasize your voluntary resignation due to health concerns. We're trying to minimize the political damage, but there will inevitably be questions and speculation." Sir Marcus gathered his photographs and documents, preparing to leave. "Your former Majesty, I should inform you that the intelligence services will need to conduct additional interviews with you over the coming weeks. Your cooperation in identifying any other compromised information would be appreciated." As the meeting drew to a close, Isabella sat in stunned silence, the reality of her situation finally becoming clear. She had traded her position as queen for what amounted to a modest sum of money, and had lost everything that had made her feel important and valued. Queen Mother Margaret rose from her seat with the assistance of her walking stick, her movements deliberate and dignified. Before leaving, she paused beside Isabella's chair and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "My dear," she said softly, "in 60 years of public life, I've learned that our actions have consequences far beyond what we can imagine. I hope you'll use this experience to become a better person, even if you can never again be queen." With that, the family began to disperse, leaving Isabella alone with Alexander in the grand drawing room that would no longer be hers to command. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of what had once been Queen Isabella's private office as she methodically packed her personal belongings into cardboard boxes. The irony was not lost on her that she was using the same type of humble containers she had once scorned when palace staff used them for storage. The gilded frames that had held her official portraits now lay empty on the mahogany desk, waiting to be replaced with images more appropriate for a former queen. Lady Margaret Sinclair, Isabella's former lady-in-waiting, worked silently beside her, carefully wrapping delicate ornaments and personal photographs in tissue paper. The elderly woman had served the royal family for over 30 years, and her loyalty had always been to the institution rather than to any individual member. Yet Isabella could see the genuine sadness in Lady Sinclair's eyes as they dismantled what had been a functioning royal office just hours earlier. "The blue porcelain vase was a gift from your mother," Lady Sinclair said quietly, holding up a delicate piece decorated with hand-painted roses. "Perhaps you'd like to keep it in your new quarters." Isabella nodded absently, her mind struggling to process the dramatic changes that had occurred since the morning's confrontation. The new quarters Lady Sinclair referenced were located in the east wing of the palace, traditionally reserved for extended family members and visiting dignitaries. While still luxurious by any normal standard, they represented a significant downgrade from the Queen's apartments she had occupied for the past 4 years. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside caused both women to look up expectantly. Princess Helena appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral as she surveyed the packing process. Isabella felt a mixture of embarrassment and resentment at being observed during this humiliating transition, but she forced herself to maintain what remained of her dignity. "Isabella," Helena said softly, stepping into the room with obvious reluctance, "I wanted to speak with you privately before the official announcement is made. I think there are some things that need to be said between us, away from the formality of this morning's meeting." Lady Sinclair immediately excused herself, understanding that the conversation required privacy. She closed the office door behind her, leaving the two women alone amid the boxes and scattered remnants of Isabella's former position. Helena moved to the window seat where Isabella had often held informal meetings with charitable organization representatives. The afternoon light caught the gold threads in her navy dress, reminding Isabella of all the state occasions where they had stood side by side, representing different aspects of the modern monarchy. "You know," Helena began, her voice thoughtful rather than accusatory, "I genuinely liked you when you first joined our family. You brought an energy and perspective that we needed, and I thought you might help us connect with people in ways we'd struggled to achieve." Isabella set down the crystal paperweight she had been holding and looked directly at Helena for the first time since the morning's revelations. "I tried to be what everyone expected me to be," she said, her voice still hoarse from crying. But no one ever clearly explained what that actually meant. Every day felt like walking through a minefield where the wrong word or gesture could create an international incident. Elena nodded with understanding that surprised Isabella. I know exactly what you mean. I felt that pressure my entire life, and I was born into it. I can only imagine how overwhelming it must have been for someone coming from outside the system. The acknowledgement of her struggles felt both validating and painful to Isabella. For 4 years, she had felt increasingly isolated, convinced that no one understood the impossible position she had been placed in. Yet here was Elena, offering the very empathy and support that might have prevented the desperate decisions that led to her downfall. The tragedy is that there were people here who could have helped you navigate these challenges, Elena continued. But you seem to reject our attempts at guidance, as if accepting help would somehow diminish your independence or authority. Isabella laughed bitterly at the observation. Independence? I haven't felt independent since the day I married your father. Every aspect of my life became subject to committee review and public scrutiny. My clothing choices, my reading material, even my exercise routine became matters of national interest. Elena's expression softened further as she recognized the genuine pain behind Isabella's words. That's the burden we all carry, Isabella. The difference is that we learn to find freedom within those constraints, while you seem to view them as personal attacks on your identity. The conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. Lord Pemberton entered with obvious discomfort, carrying an envelope sealed with the royal coat of arms. His usual composure was slightly strained as he approached Isabella with what she immediately recognized as official correspondence. Your former Majesty, he said, using the awkward title that had been hastily developed for this unprecedented situation. His Majesty has asked me to deliver this letter, which outlines the specific terms and conditions of your new status within the royal household. Isabella accepted the envelope with trembling hands, noting that her name was written in Alexander's distinctive handwriting. Even in the midst of this personal and political crisis, he had taken the time to personally address the correspondence that would define the rest of her life. The letter, written on heavy cream paper with the royal letterhead, outlined a surprisingly generous settlement, considering the circumstances of her disgrace. She would retain a substantial annual allowance, comfortable living quarters within the palace grounds, and access to the same medical and security services provided to other family members. However, the restrictions were equally clear. No public appearances without explicit approval, no media interviews or statements, and absolutely no access to any government information or state functions. There's also this, Lord Pemberton said, producing a smaller envelope. A personal message from His Majesty, separate from the official terms. Isabella opened the second letter with hands that shook slightly, recognizing the more informal stationery Alexander used for family correspondence. The message was brief but carried emotional weight that the formal document could not convey. Isabella, despite everything that has happened, I want you to know that I still care about your well-being. You will always have a place in this family, even if you can no longer serve in an official capacity. I hope that in time you will find peace with these new circumstances and perhaps discover a way to contribute positively to the causes you claim to care about. The mistakes you made do not erase the good intentions I believe motivated you initially. Alexander. Tears began to flow again as Isabella absorbed the unexpected kindness in her estranged husband's words. She had expected anger, recrimination, and cold dismissal. Instead, she found a measured forgiveness that somehow made her guilt more bearable, while simultaneously highlighting the magnitude of what she had lost. Elena watched Isabella read the letter with growing concern for her former stepmother's emotional state. Despite the anger she felt about Isabella's betrayal, Elena recognized that the woman before her was genuinely suffering and would need support to navigate the difficult transition ahead. Isabella, Elena said gently, I know this feels like the end of everything important in your life, but it doesn't have to be. You have knowledge and experience that could be valuable in the private sector. Many former royal family members have found meaningful ways to contribute to society without official titles or positions. Isabella looked up from Alexander's letter with a mixture of hope and skepticism. What kind of meaningful contributions can someone make when they're known primarily for betraying their country's trust? Elena considered the question carefully before responding. That depends on what you choose to do with the rest of your life. You could become an advocate for people struggling with the pressures of public life, or work with organizations that help families facing financial crises, like your brother's situation. Your mistakes don't have to define you permanently. The suggestion sparked something in Isabella's mind that she hadn't expected to feel again: possibility. For months, she had felt trapped in a role that seemed to offer no solutions to the problems that mattered to her. Perhaps losing her official position might paradoxically provide the freedom to address issues she cared about without the constraints of royal protocol. "The announcement will be made in 1 hour," Lord Pemberton informed them, checking his pocket watch with practiced precision. "The press office has prepared a statement emphasizing health concerns and your desire to focus on private family matters. There should be minimal immediate fallout, though longer-term speculation will be unavoidable." Isabella nodded absently, her mind already shifting from the immediate crisis to the practical realities of her new situation. She would need to contact her brother and explain what had happened, arrange for her personal staff to be reassigned, and begin the psychological process of adapting to life without the status and privileges she had grown accustomed to. "Elena," she said suddenly, "would it be possible for me to write a letter to your father? Not about the political situation, but about our personal relationship? I feel like there are things I need to say that couldn't be expressed during this morning's confrontation." Elena smiled for the first time since entering the room. "I think that would be very appropriate, Isabella. He's been struggling with this decision, and I believe he would appreciate hearing your thoughts once you've had time to process what's happened." As the afternoon shadows grew longer, Isabella began to see her situation with new clarity. She had lost her crown, her official status, and much of her public reputation, but she had also been freed from expectations and obligations that had never felt natural to her. For the first time in years, she could make choices based on her own values rather than on the requirements of constitutional monarchy. The woman who had entered the palace as Queen Isabella 4 years earlier would cease to exist after today's announcement, but perhaps the woman who emerged from this crisis might find ways to make a positive impact that were more authentic and personally meaningful than anything she had achieved while wearing the crown. Lady Sinclair returned to continue the packing process, and the three women worked together in companionable silence as the sun set over the palace grounds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and uncertainties, but Isabella felt a surprising sense of relief as she prepared to step away from a role that had never truly fit her capabilities or temperament. The final box was sealed just as the evening news began broadcasting the announcement of her resignation, marking the official end of one of the shortest and most controversial reigns in Valdorian history. 2 weeks had passed since the announcement of Queen Isabella's resignation, and the initial media frenzy was beginning to settle into a more manageable rhythm of speculation and analysis. Alexander stood in his private study reviewing the morning intelligence briefings, noting with relief that the international response had been more measured than his advisors had initially feared. The carefully crafted explanation of health concerns and family priorities had provided sufficient cover to avoid deeper investigations into the true circumstances of Isabella's departure. Prince William entered the study carrying his own set of briefing documents, his expression reflecting the cautious optimism that had begun to emerge within palace circles. The transition period was proving less traumatic than anyone had dared hope, though significant challenges remained in rebuilding the monarchy's credibility and public trust. "The Foreign Office has completed their assessment of potential security breaches," William reported, settling into the chair across from his father's desk. "While there was clearly sensitive information shared with foreign operatives, the damage appears to be limited to trade negotiations and ceremonial protocols. Nothing involving defense or intelligence operations was compromised." Alexander felt a wave of relief at this news, having spent sleepless nights imagining the worst possible scenarios. The idea that Isabella's betrayal might have endangered military personnel or ongoing intelligence operations had been his greatest fear throughout this entire ordeal. "What about the parliamentary inquiry?" Alexander asked, referring to the formal investigation that had been inevitable once news of the resignation began circulating among government officials. William's expression grew more serious. "Prime Minister Richardson has managed to limit the scope to a general review of palace security procedures. The Intelligence Committee will conduct a closed-door session next week, but they've agreed to avoid public hearings that might further damage the monarchy's reputation." The political protection being offered was more generous than Alexander had expected, reflecting both the government's recognition of the crown's constitutional importance and their desire to avoid the instability that might result from a more dramatic royal crisis. Still, he understood that this cooperation came with an implicit expectation that such problems would not recur. "And how is Isabella adjusting to her new circumstances?" Alexander asked, though he already knew much of the answer from daily security reports and staff observations. William's expression softened slightly. "Better than expected, actually. She's been spending time in the palace library researching charitable organizations focused on family financial crises. Elena thinks she might be serious about finding a constructive way to use her experience." The news surprised Alexander, who had expected Isabella to retreat into bitter isolation or possibly attempt to rebuild her public profile through media appearances. Her apparent interest in meaningful charitable work suggested a level of personal growth that he had not anticipated. Elizabeth Hartwell, the palace physician, knocked softly before entering the study. The middle-aged woman had been treating Isabella's anxiety and depression since the resignation, and her medical expertise had become crucial in managing the practical aspects of the transition. "Your Majesty," Dr. Hartwell said with professional courtesy, "I wanted to update you on Isabella's mental health status. She's been experiencing understandable stress and feelings of guilt, but she's also showing remarkable resilience. Her mood has stabilized significantly over the past week." Alexander appreciated the doctor's directness and discretion in handling what could have been an extremely complicated medical situation. Isabella's psychological well-being had been a genuine concern, given the dramatic nature of her fall from grace and the isolation she now faced. "Is she receiving appropriate treatment?" Alexander asked, his concern for his wife's welfare overriding any lingering anger about her betrayal. Dr. Hartwell nodded reassuringly. "She's responding well to counseling sessions, and we've adjusted her medication to address the anxiety symptoms. More importantly, she seems to be developing a more realistic understanding of her situation and potential future options." The conversation was interrupted by Princess Elena, who appeared in the doorway with obvious excitement. In her hands, she carried what appeared to be a formal proposal document, professionally bound and bearing an impressive array of official stamps and signatures. "Father, you need to see this," Elena said, approaching the desk with barely contained enthusiasm. "Isabella has submitted a formal proposal to establish a charitable foundation focused on helping families facing financial emergencies. The research is incredibly thorough, and the proposed structure is quite sophisticated." Alexander accepted the document with curiosity, noting that the cover page identified Isabella not by her former royal title, but simply as Lady Isabella Blackstone, reflecting her new status as the king's wife without royal rank. The proposal itself was indeed impressive, outlining a comprehensive approach to providing emergency financial assistance, debt counseling, and business recovery support for families in crisis. "The most interesting aspect," Elena continued, "is that she's proposing to fund the initial operations using her own settlement money from the royal household. It would be a genuine commitment of her personal resources, rather than just another ceremonial patronage position." William leaned forward to examine the proposal over his father's shoulder, his expression reflecting genuine surprise at the quality and depth of Isabella's research. "She's identified specific gaps in existing social services and developed practical solutions. This isn't just good intentions, it's a serious policy document." Alexander read through the executive summary with growing amazement. The woman who had seemed so disconnected from the realities of public service during her time as queen had apparently developed a sophisticated understanding of economic policy and social welfare systems. The proposal demonstrated knowledge and insight that she had never displayed during her official duties. "Has she consulted with any government agencies about this?" Alexander asked, noting references to coordination with existing welfare programs and tax incentive structures. Elena smiled at the question. "She's been in contact with the Treasury, the Department of Social Services, and 3 major banking institutions. All of them have provided preliminary endorsements of her approach. The Treasury actually called it innovative and potentially transformative in their response letter." The transformation in Isabella's focus and capabilities was so dramatic that Alexander wondered if he had fundamentally misunderstood her character during their marriage. Perhaps the pressures and constraints of royal protocol had prevented her from demonstrating abilities that were now emerging in this new context. Lord Pemberton entered with his usual measured pace. carrying the afternoon post, and wearing an expression of mild bewilderment. "Your Majesty, I have rather unusual news. Lady Isabella has received 17 separate requests for speaking engagements from universities and policy institutes across Europe. Apparently, news of her charitable foundation proposal has generated significant academic interest. The idea of Isabella as a sought-after speaker on social policy would have seemed absurd just weeks earlier. Yet the evidence suggested that her unique combination of personal experience with financial crisis and insider knowledge of government operations had created an unexpectedly valuable perspective. There's also this," Lord Pemberton added, producing an elegant envelope addressed to Alexander in Isabella's handwriting. "Lady Isabella asked me to deliver this when you had time to read it privately." Alexander accepted the letter with the same careful attention he had given to all correspondence during this difficult period. Isabella's personal notes had become an important source of insight into her emotional state and intentions for the future. The letter was written on simple cream paper, without any royal insignia, reflecting her new status while maintaining the elegant penmanship that had always characterized her personal correspondence. "My dearest Alexander, I wanted you to know how deeply I regret the pain and embarrassment my actions have caused you and our family. I understand now that my behavior was inexcusable, regardless of the pressures I felt at the time. However, I also want you to know that this experience has taught me valuable lessons about responsibility, service, and the importance of using whatever privileges I have for the benefit of others. The charitable foundation I'm proposing represents my attempt to transform my mistakes into something positive and meaningful. I hope that in time you might see this work as evidence of my genuine remorse and my commitment to becoming worthy of the forgiveness you've already shown me. With love and respect, Isabella." Alexander folded the letter carefully, feeling a complex mixture of emotions as he considered how dramatically both Isabella and his own understanding of her had evolved over the past several weeks. The woman who had betrayed state secrets for money was apparently the same person who was now proposing to donate her entire financial settlement to help other families avoid similar desperate choices. "What do you think we should do about the speaking requests?" William asked, bringing the conversation back to practical considerations. Alexander considered the question carefully, weighing the potential benefits against the risks of allowing Isabella to become a public figure again so soon after her disgrace. "I think we should allow her to accept a limited number of academic engagements, provided she clears her remarks through the palace press office and focuses exclusively on her charitable work." Elena nodded approvingly at this decision. "It would demonstrate our confidence in her rehabilitation while maintaining appropriate oversight. And honestly, if she can generate public support for her foundation, it might help restore some positive attention to the royal family's commitment to social causes." Dr. Hartwell gathered her medical files in preparation to leave. From a therapeutic perspective, having meaningful work and public recognition for positive contributions could be extremely beneficial for Isabella's continued recovery. Purpose and achievement are powerful tools for overcoming guilt and depression. As the afternoon meeting concluded, Alexander reflected on the unexpected turns that Isabella's story had taken since her resignation. What had begun as a tale of betrayal and disgrace was evolving into something more complex and potentially redemptive. While she could never again serve as Queen of Valdoria, she might yet find a way to make contributions that were more valuable and authentic than anything she had achieved while holding that title. The monarchy had survived its crisis, and perhaps all parties involved had learned important lessons about duty, forgiveness, and the possibility of second chances. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time since discovering Isabella's betrayal, Alexander felt hopeful about what might emerge from this difficult chapter in their family's history. 3 months had passed since Queen Isabella's resignation, and the autumn air carried a sense of renewal through the grounds of Blackstone Palace. Alexander stood at the windows of his study watching as construction workers put the finishing touches on a modest building that would serve as headquarters for the Blackstone Family Crisis Foundation, Isabella's charitable organization that had exceeded everyone's expectations in both its scope and its early success. The foundation's launch event was scheduled for the following week, and Alexander found himself genuinely proud of what his former queen had accomplished in such a short time. The initial funding of £2 million from Isabella's settlement had been supplemented by matching grants from 3 major corporations and a substantial donation from an anonymous wealthy philanthropist who had been impressed by the foundation's innovative approach to family financial emergencies. Prince William knocked before entering the study, carrying a folder of documents that had become familiar sights during the Foundation's development process. As the heir to the throne, William had taken responsibility for monitoring Isabella's public activities to ensure they remained appropriate and beneficial to the royal family's reputation. "The preliminary impact assessment is remarkable," William reported, settling into his usual chair. "In just 2 months of operations, the Foundation has assisted 47 families facing immediate financial crises with a success rate of 91% in preventing bankruptcies or home foreclosures." Alexander accepted the assessment report with interest, noting that the statistics were compiled by an independent auditing firm rather than by the Foundation itself. The objectivity of the evaluation added credibility to what were genuinely impressive results. "More importantly," William continued, "the media coverage has been overwhelmingly positive. Isabella's speaking engagements have generated favorable publicity for both the Foundation and, by extension, for the royal family's commitment to social responsibility." The transformation in public perception had been one of the most surprising aspects of the entire situation. Isabella's candid discussions of her own financial mistakes and her family's crisis had resonated with audiences who saw her as someone who understood their struggles in ways that traditional royalty could not. Princess Elena entered the study carrying a newspaper and wearing an expression of barely contained amusement. "You both need to see the editorial in this morning's Telegraph," she announced, spreading the paper on Alexander's desk. "The headline is, 'The Queen We Never Knew We Needed.'" Alexander read the editorial with growing astonishment. The columnist praised Isabella's Foundation as representing exactly the kind of practical, results-oriented approach to social problems that modern monarchy should embrace. The article went on to suggest that Isabella's resignation from her formal royal role had paradoxically freed her to make more meaningful contributions than she ever could have achieved while constrained by traditional protocol. The most interesting part, Elena pointed out, is the comparison they make between Isabella's current work and the charitable activities of other royal family members. They're arguing that her hands-on, personally funded approach is more effective than traditional ceremonial patronages. The implicit criticism of established royal charitable practices stung slightly, but Alexander had to acknowledge that there was validity to the comparison. Isabella's willingness to risk her own financial security and to work directly with families in crisis did represent a level of personal commitment that formal royal patronages rarely achieved. Dr. Hartwell arrived for her monthly briefing on Isabella's psychological progress, carrying her usual collection of medical files and assessment reports. The physician's role had evolved from crisis management to monitoring Isabella's continued development as she adapted to her new life and responsibilities. "Lady Isabella's mental health has stabilized remarkably," Dr. Hartwell reported. "Her sense of purpose and accomplishment through the Foundation work has essentially eliminated the anxiety and depression symptoms she experienced immediately after her resignation. She's developed genuine confidence in her abilities and a clear vision for her future." Alexander felt relief at this news, having worried that Isabella might never fully recover from the shame and isolation of her disgrace. Her apparent psychological transformation suggested that losing her royal title might have been beneficial, rather than purely punitive. Has she expressed any regrets about her resignation or desires to reclaim her former status? Alexander asked, curious about Isabella's private thoughts on her dramatic change in circumstances. Dr. Hartwell shook her head definitively. Quite the opposite, actually. She's mentioned several times that she feels more authentically herself now than she ever did as queen. The freedom to focus on work she finds meaningful, without the constraints of royal protocol, appears to have been genuinely liberating. The conversation was interrupted by Lord Pemberton, who entered with obvious excitement, carrying an ornate envelope bearing the seal of the Nobel Prize Committee. Alexander's eyebrows rose at the unexpected correspondence, wondering what possible connection the prestigious organization might have to their current situation. "Your Majesty," Lord Pemberton announced with barely contained pride, "Lady Isabella has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for her innovative approach to preventing family financial crises and promoting economic stability in vulnerable communities." The room fell silent as the implications of this announcement sank in. A woman who had been stripped of her royal title for betraying state secrets was now being recognized by one of the world's most prestigious institutions for her contributions to social welfare and peace. William was the first to find his voice. This is extraordinary. Nobel nominations require support from qualified nominators like government officials, university professors, or previous laureates. Someone with serious credentials clearly believes Isabella's work represents a significant contribution to global welfare. Elena laughed with genuine delight at the unexpected recognition. Can you imagine the headlines when this news becomes public? Disgraced former queen nominated for Nobel Prize? It's almost too perfect to believe. Alexander found himself experiencing a complex mixture of emotions as he contemplated this development. Pride in Isabella's accomplishments competed with lingering hurt over her betrayal, while admiration for her transformation warred with concerns about how this recognition might affect the royal family's reputation. Hartwell gathered her files in preparation to leave, but paused to offer a final observation. From a psychological perspective, this nomination validates Isabella's complete rehabilitation. She's transformed herself from someone who made terrible choices out of desperation into someone who helps others avoid similar desperate situations. As the afternoon progressed, Alexander found himself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months earlier, Isabella had been a struggling queen who felt trapped and inadequate in her role. Her betrayal of state secrets had seemed like the ultimate proof of her unsuitability for royal responsibilities. Yet the woman who emerged from that crisis had demonstrated capabilities and commitment that might never have surfaced within the constraints of traditional royal duties. Her foundation was helping real families solve real problems, and her public speaking was generating policy discussions about innovative approaches to social welfare. The irony was not lost on Alexander that Isabella's greatest contributions to society had come only after she lost the position that was supposed to enable such contributions. Perhaps the rigid structures of constitutional monarchy, while necessary for institutional stability, sometimes prevented individuals from reaching their full potential. A soft knock on the study door preceded Isabella's own entrance, the first time she had visited this room since the morning of her resignation 3 months earlier. She appeared confident and purposeful, wearing a simple but elegant navy dress that reflected her new status while maintaining appropriate dignity. "Alexander," she said softly, "I wanted to speak with you personally about the Nobel nomination before the news becomes public. I know this situation might create complicated feelings for you and the family." Alexander gestured for her to sit in the chair that William had vacated, noting how different she seemed from the anxious and defensive woman who had faced accusations in this same room months earlier. There was a calmness and self-assurance about her now that had been notably absent during her time as queen. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished, Isabella," Alexander said, surprising himself with the sincerity of his words. "Your foundation is making a real difference in people's lives, and you found a way to serve the public good that might be more meaningful than anything you could have achieved as queen." Isabella's eyes filled with tears at this unexpected affirmation from the man she had disappointed so profoundly. "Thank you, Alexander. I know I can never fully make up for the harm I caused, but I hope that my current work demonstrates that I've learned from those mistakes." The conversation between former spouses who had found their way to mutual respect despite betrayal and pain continued as the sun set over the palace grounds. Outside, the foundation's new building stood as a symbol of redemption and second chances, representing the possibility that even the greatest failures could eventually be transformed into meaningful contributions. The following morning's newspapers would announce Isabella's Nobel nomination, generating international attention and sparking debates about forgiveness, rehabilitation, and the true meaning of public service. But in the quiet of the royal study, two people who had hurt each other deeply were finally able to acknowledge that they had both grown and changed through their shared crisis. The monarchy had survived, the kingdom's security had been preserved, and a woman who had lost her crown had discovered something more valuable, a sense of purpose and achievement that no title could provide or take away. In the end, perhaps everyone involved had found exactly what they needed, even if it was nothing like what they had originally wanted.